So we're continuing our series on 2 Peter. We left off a couple weeks ago on this whole idea of the warnings about the false teachers and these false prophets, what should happen to them, trying to make the argument that, yes, sometimes God acts, even though it can often seem like the wicked win and the cheaters prosper, God does act. So this is kind of following up on that. So it says in 2 Peter 2, 4 through 10, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment, and if he did not spare the ancient world, even though he saved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood on the world of the ungodly, and if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes he condemned them to extinction, and made them an example of what is coming to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, greatly distressed by the licentiousness of the lawless, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds that he saw and heard, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trial and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, especially those who indulge in their flesh and depraved lust and who despise authority." And that was all one sentence. So, the judgment of God involves both punishment for the ungodly and the salvation of the faithful. But is there any evidence that God does in fact so act? That's kind of the question on the minds of the people that 2 Peter's writing to, because he's warning them about these false teachers that use the faith for their own means to corrupt, to manipulate people. And you're trying to say, hey, they will get their day, because often the false teachers have prevailed. They've gotten what they've wanted. We can look at throughout history, people have used faith for financial purposes for themselves. They've used faith to trick people into doing this or that, to get whole nations to go to war. People have often used the faith in a corrupted way for their own personal means, and they often prosper. So the writer's trying to argue in the form of a long sentence, beginning with the conditional if and concluding with then. If this, and this happen, then you have your answer. God certainly does know how to punish and to rescue. So 3 cases of punishment are offered. First, the sinning angels, the sons of God of Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So if you recall way back in Genesis, it's one of those texts that aren't typically preached on, but it talks about how the sons of God impregnated human women, and they became this race of half angel, half human babies that were like giants, and they did a bunch of bad stuff. There's only a couple verses on it, not much is said. A whole host of other fantasy literature have been based on these kind of half angel, half human baby things. But the writer shows their knowledge of a Jewish writing called 1st Enoch, probably dated between the 3rd century BCE and 1st century CE, which offers an elaborate interpretation of biblical history. So, anybody read 1st Enoch? So it's not in the Hebrew Bible, but it's a text that Jews at the time would have been aware of. It's what we call the pseudepigrapha, a collection of different Jewish writings of the time that interpret the law, the Torah, that tell other stories. If you want to read it, I've got a big copy in my office. So it's like the book of the 12 patriarchs, the book of Moses, 1st Enoch, 2nd Enoch. So a lot of Jews would have known those books. So according to 1st Enoch 10, the angels of Genesis 6 became involved with earthly women, and their offspring loosed war, violence, and idolatry in the world. As punishment, these angels were cast down into hell to be confined in dark pits until the final day of judgment. So it's interesting that the writer assumes the readers not only knew about 1st Enoch, but also regarded it as an authoritative account of God's activity, maybe even canon. So somehow to this community he was writing, he would have known, they would know 1st Enoch, because none of that stuff about the pit and the torment is in the Bible. It's just in 1st Enoch. So the second example of divine judgment is in the flood in the days of Noah. Again, those punished are the ungodly. Because these warnings are all for false teachers, one might expect examples of those who erred in doctrine or belief, but we've already seen, and will again in chapter 2, verses 12 to 22, that the writer joins doctrinal and moral failures as though related as cause and effect, perhaps as things that flow from each other. The final case of divine punishment is the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But as stated earlier, God's judgment involves also the rescue of the righteous. So that God is able to save the faithful is established by the two classic cases of Noah and his family from the flood and Lot from the burning cities. And just in case the appropriateness of the recital is lost on those addressed by the letter, the point is driven home. This message is for those who indulge in the flesh and despise the authority of the apostles who have given the truth that the heretics now mock. So the author of 2 Peter is kind of making his claim. And we already talked about he is kind of in this camp of, this church is new. They're trying to figure out what direction they're going to go, who they're going to be. This author is kind of advocating for the way of the apostles, of apostolic authority. Not everyone thought that way. Some people wanted new voices to come in, new ways of thinking about faith and what the Christian church is going to be. Even very early on, there were major disagreements of what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to believe Jesus is Lord? You had arguments over Jesus' divinity, the divinity of the Holy Spirit. Early on, you had arguments between Peter and Paul about, do you have to be circumcised or not? Not everyone is on the same page. It's like in American history. Sometimes when we're taught at an early age, we kind of get the idea that all the founding fathers were on the same page, were really good friends, and everything happened really smoothly. Once they decided, hey, let's declare independence, it was just smooth sailing from there. Everyone agreed on everything. I had that impression as a kid in 3rd grade. Then you watch Hamilton and you realize they hated each other so much they had rap battles about it. So again, things were different. Not everyone agreed. They had to work out which way to go. And we didn't know as a nation which way we were going to go. And there have been twists and turns since. Same thing with the church. Early on, how are we going to do this thing? And all these twists and turns since. So 2 Peter is arguing for this apostolic succession. So anybody who doesn't agree with that, he's kind of labeling as a false teacher and basically saying punishment awaits these kind of people. So it's somewhat sad, but also revealing and true that even early on in the Bible, we had this idea of my way, my doctrine is the right one, and everyone else is the wrong one. God's going to uplift me and punish them. Even the Bible is not immune to this kind of stuff because they're humans writing about it, trying to figure it out. That's why you often have the Bible argues with itself throughout its books. And we see it throughout history now that churches will often split over, well, we think this is the way, you think that's the way. You have the Catholic Orthodox split, the Protestant Reformation, all these other denominations, and people often get accused of, well, you're being a false teacher because you're allowing children to be baptized, or you're allowing anyone to take communion. You're allowing women to lead the church. Whatever it is, you are being false. I was lambasted on Facebook by this random guy a while back who used to come sometimes. He got really mad that we had a female pastor and didn't like Marie and all this stuff. And somebody told me he had put on Facebook, like, Dairy Church is a false church teaching false doctrine. Their pastor is an agent of Satan. So you get that still sometimes because of here's what our beliefs are. We believe women can lead in the church, all this different stuff. So there are always still churches that say, you are the false teacher. You are the false teacher. The reality is, when God's promised day comes, all of us are going to realize we were false about something. We were wrong about something. So we should try to have grace for each other and have these conversations with faith, hope, and love, and not just my way's right and this is wrong. I think we see even in 2 Peter, the very beginnings of the church, we start kind of circling the wagons on here's what we think the church should look like. And we've been doing it ever since. I think to the detriment of the church. The more open we can be about others' ideas, we don't have to agree with everybody, but can we listen and say, why is it that you think this? Tell me more. Let's be curious about what leads someone to have this belief about faith, about the Bible, about politics, and maybe understand at a deeper level we have a lot more in common than we have dissimilar. And even if we're completely opposite, can we learn from each other? Questions, comments, political remarks? Yes?
As for the Southern Baptists have now decided that they don't want women
Well, that's a long-term thing. They've never liked it. But now some churches are saying they do. So now they're getting kicked out of the conference. So that's been a new thing. So like Rick Warren's church has been kicked out of their Baptist conference because they started kind of saying women can be. All these things, whether it's women, tons of denominations still don't allow women to be. Whether it's the LGBTQ issue, whether it's when you're baptized, you have to be a certain age or not, who can take communion. There are lots of churches that if you aren't baptized and a member of that church, they won't let you have communion. And so if you try to go, they're like, nope, get blessed or something instead. So there's all these issues that are still out there that still cause these divisions. And people say, we are the true church. That's why, like the Presbyterian church, we don't say we're the only true church. We say we are a church. We probably get a lot wrong. We hope we get a lot right. But we're going to go through it together in faith. And I think that's a refreshing approach to understanding who God is and how we're to live with God. Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much. See you next week.